The rain fell soft and steady that April evening, turning the dirt streets of Dry Hollow into rivers of mud. Clara Bell pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped off the stagecoach, her boots sinking into the mire. The driver tossed down her single canvas bag without ceremony before clicking his tongue at the horses, eager to reach shelter. She stood there in the gathering dusk, watching the coach disappear around the bend, taking with it the last connection to everything she'd known. 28 years old, with nothing but a bag of clothes and a crumpled list of establishments that might hire help. The rain soaked through her bonnet, but she didn't move. Not yet. The main street stretched before her, lined with wooden storefronts whose painted signs grew harder to read in the failing light. Garrison's General Store, the Silver Dollar Saloon, Murphy's boarding house crossed off her list already, the proprietor having taken one look at her ringless finger and shut the door with a sharp, "No rooms." Clara had expected as much. A woman alone, no husband in sight, no family name to vouch for her. The wedding band she'd worn for 3 years lay somewhere at the bottom of the Missouri River, thrown from a ferry boat 2 weeks past. She flexed her bare left hand, still feeling the phantom weight of it. The church stood at the far end of the street, its modest steeple dark against the storm clouds. Clara picked her way through the mud, her skirts growing heavier with each step. Behind the church, she'd noticed from the coach, stood a small barn. Not ideal, but better than the open street. The barn door protested with a creak as she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of hay and old wood, tinged with the mustiness of neglect. Weak light filtered through gaps in the walls, revealing empty stalls and a ladder leading to a loft. No animals a good sign. Abandoned, most likely. Clara climbed carefully, testing each rung. The loft held old hay bales, relatively dry despite the leaking roof in one corner. She arranged them into a makeshift bed, spreading her spare shawl over the scratchy straw. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she'd grown used to that particular ache over the past weeks. From her bag, she pulled out her mother's Bible, its leather cover soft with age. Inside the front cover, her mother's careful script, Clara Jane Morrison, born June 12, 1822. Below it, in different ink, married to Thomas Bell, March 3, 1847. She'd been tempted to tear out that page a dozen times, but couldn't bring herself to deface her mother's Bible. She didn't read tonight. Instead, she lay back on the hay and listened to the rain drumming on the roof. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. Voices drifted from the saloon, punctuated by occasional laughter, normal sounds of a town settling in for the night, carrying on as if her world hadn't crumbled to dust. Thomas would be looking for her by now. Or rather, he'd have men looking he wouldn't lower himself to chase after a runaway wife. She wondered what story he'd tell. That she'd gone mad, perhaps. That the frontier life had broken her delicate constitution. Certainly not the truth that she'd finally grown tired of being treated like one of his possessions, displayed when useful, locked away when not. The last straw had been small, really, almost laughable. He'd sold her mare the gentle bay her father had given her as a wedding gift without asking, without even telling her until she'd gone to the stable and found the stall empty. "Just a horse," he'd said, genuinely puzzled by her tears. "I'll buy you another if you must have one." But it wasn't about the horse. It was about 3 years of disappearing, bit by bit. 3 years of "Yes, Thomas," and "Of course, Thomas," and watching her words grow fewer while his filled all the space between them. 3 years of his hands on her shoulders, steering her through rooms full of his business associates like she was a prize heifer at auction. Clara shifted on the hay, pulling her damp skirts around her legs. Tomorrow she'd try again. The list in her pocket named 3 more establishments: the restaurant, the hotel laundry, and, failing those, the saloon. She'd sworn she wouldn't sink that low, but hunger had a way of adjusting one's principles. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas's face when he'd realized she was truly gone. Not angry, he saved his anger for business rivals and incompetent servants. No, he'd be confused, the way he'd been about the horse, unable to comprehend why his wife would choose uncertainty and hardship over comfort and security, unable to see that a cage was still a cage, no matter how fine the bars. The barn door creaked below. Clara held her breath, one hand reaching for the small knife in her boot. Footsteps, careful and measured. Then a voice, elderly and female. "I know you're up there, child. Saw you from the rectory window." Clara peered over the edge of the loft. A woman stood below, gray-haired and thin, holding a lantern in one hand and a covered basket in the other. "I'm Mrs. Holbrook," the woman continued. "The pastor's wife. You planning to explain yourself? Or shall we pretend you've got good reason to be sleeping in our hay?" Clara's voice came out rusty. She cleared her throat. "I meant no harm. Ma'am, I'll be gone by morning." "Nonsense. Come down here where I can see you proper." Clara descended slowly, aware of her muddy boots and travel-stained dress. In the lantern light, Mrs. Holbrook's face showed deep lines around kind eyes. "Running from or running to?" the older woman asked. "I don't know yet," Clara answered honestly. Mrs. Holbrook studied her for a long moment, taking in the careful posture, the quality of her dress despite its condition, the way she held herself like someone trying not to take up space. "Well," she said finally, setting the basket on a hay bale, "I've brought bread and cheese. There's water from the well in that bucket by the door. You can sleep here tonight. The Lord's house offers sanctuary to all who need it. But come morning, you'll need to make some decisions." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Mrs. Holbrook turned to go, then paused. "The restaurant on Main Street. Martha runs it. She's particular about help, but she's fair. Tell her Anna Holbrook sent you. And child," she looked back, "whatever you're running from, make sure you're not carrying it with you." After she left, Clara sat in the circle of lantern light and ate slowly, savoring each bite of the coarse bread. Tomorrow she'd face the town again, try to build something from nothing. But tonight, she had shelter and food and the first kindness she'd encountered in weeks. She thought about Mrs. Holbrook's words. Was she carrying Thomas with her? Not Thomas himself, but the shadow of him, the constant checking over her shoulder. The automatic shrinking of herself to avoid notice, the apologies that rose to her lips before anyone had accused her of anything. The rain gentled to a whisper against the roof. Clara climbed back to her makeshift bed and lay down fully dressed, the knife still in her boot. Somewhere out there, her old life was looking for her, but here in this forgotten barn in a town she'd chosen at random, she was nobody, nothing. For the first time in 3 years, the thought didn't frighten her. It felt like freedom. The morning sun struggled through gray clouds as Clara made her way down Main Street, her boots considerably cleaner after an hour spent at the well behind the church. She'd braided her dark hair tight and pinned it beneath her least-worn bonnet, trying to present herself as respectable despite the travel dust that clung to her dress. Martha's restaurant sat between the bank and the milliner's shop, its windows foggy with steam. Through the glass, Clara could see tables set with checkered cloths. A few early customers bent over their plates. She stood outside for a moment, gathering courage, then pushed open the door. The warmth hit her immediately, bacon grease and coffee and fresh biscuits. Her stomach twisted with hunger despite Mrs. Holbrook's charity the night before. A woman emerged from the kitchen, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "We're not hiring," she said before Clara could speak. "Mrs. Holbrook sent me," Clara replied quietly. Martha's expression shifted, not quite softening, but growing less hostile. She looked Clara up and down, taking in the quality of her dress, the careful mending at the hem, the way she held herself. "Anna did she?" "Well," Martha gestured to an empty table near the window. "Sit. Can't talk properly to someone who looks ready to faint." Clara wanted to protest that she was fine, but Martha had already disappeared into the kitchen. She returned with a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, setting it down with a cup of black coffee. "Eat first, then we'll see." Clara knew better than to refuse. She ate slowly, mindful of her manners even as hunger urged her to wolf down the food. Martha busied herself wiping down the tables, occasionally glancing over. When Clara finished, Martha poured more coffee and sat across from her. "Where's your husband?" The question came sharp and direct. Clara had prepared for this. "Dead," she said simply. It was easier than the truth and invited fewer questions. Martha's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't challenge the lie. "Children?" "No." "Can you cook?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you work hard without complaining, show up on time, and keep your troubles to yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." Martha leaned back, studying her. "I don't hire women who bring drama to my establishment. No gentleman callers during work hours, no gossiping with customers. You work, you get paid fair wages. You keep your business your own. Understood?" "Perfectly." "Good. You can start now. Apron's in the kitchen." Clara had been washing dishes for an hour when she heard the bell over the door chime. She didn't look up. Martha had made it clear that kitchen help stayed in the kitchen unless specifically called, but she could hear Martha's voice change, becoming almost deferential. "Morning, Mr. Ray. Usual table." "That'll be fine, Martha." The voice was low, measured. Clara found herself pausing, hands still in the soapy water, though she couldn't say why. "Coffee'll be right out," Martha said, then pushed through the kitchen door. "Clara, coffee for table 3. And try not to spill it." Clara dried her hands and picked up the coffee pot, her movements careful and deliberate. She pushed through the door and saw him immediately, couldn't help but see him, as he seemed to take up more space than the chair he occupied. He wasn't particularly tall, but there was something about the way he sat, completely at ease yet aware of everything around him. Dark hair touched with early gray at the temples, though he couldn't be more than 35. His clothes were well made but practical, the attire of a man who had money but worked with his hands. When he looked up at her approach, his eyes were the color of winter sky. Clara poured the coffee without meeting his gaze, concentrating on keeping her hand steady. "You're new," he said, not a question. "Started this morning, sir." "Welcome to Dry Hollow, then." She risked a glance at him. He wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something kind in his expression. She nodded and turned to go. "Miss?" She paused. "The coffee's better when it's hot." It took her a moment to realize she'd forgotten to set the pot down. Heat flooded her cheeks as she placed it on his table and retreated to the kitchen, behind the door. She pressed her palms to her burning face. What was wrong with her? She'd served hundreds of men at Thomas's dinner parties without a flutter. But those men had looked through her, seeing only the hands that poured their drinks. This man, Ray, Martha had called him, had looked at her, seen her. The morning rush kept her busy enough to push the encounter from her mind. She washed dishes, helped serve when Martha's usual girl came in late, learned the rhythm of the kitchen. Martha was demanding but fair, correcting without cruelty, teaching without condescension. Around 10, the restaurant emptied except for 2 old-timers playing checkers in the corner. Clara was wiping down tables when Martha emerged from the kitchen. "He owns the Triple S Ranch, 3 miles north," Martha said without preamble. "Silas Ray, been here 8 years, built the place up from nothing, keeps to himself mostly. Comes in Tuesdays and Fridays for breakfast, Sunday after church." Clara kept wiping, unsure why Martha was telling her this. "Good man," Martha continued. "Fair employer. Lost his fiancée to fever 4 years back. Hasn't courted anyone since. The widow Patterson's been trying to catch his eye, but he's polite as stone to her advances." "I wasn't," Clara began. "I know what you weren't," Martha interrupted. "I also know what I saw. Just be careful, girl. You're running from something, that's plain as day. Don't run towards something that might be worse. Clara's hand stilled on the cloth. How did you? 20 years I've been feeding folks in this town. I know the look of a woman who's left something behind. Had it myself once. Martha's voice gentled slightly. You do your work, keep your head down, save your wages. In 6 months, you'll have enough to go anywhere you want. California, maybe Oregon, somewhere far from whatever you're not talking about. The bell chimed again, and Martha's practical mask slipped back into place. Customers, back to the kitchen with you. The day passed in a blur of dishes and steam. Clara's hands, soft from years of ladylike inactivity, reddened and cracked in the hot water. Her back ached from bending over the sink, but with each plate she cleaned, each hour that passed, she felt something inside her unknotting. This was honest work, simple work. No one expected her to smile prettily or make clever conversation. No one cared if she knew French or could play the pianoforte. She was just hands and strong shoulders and the ability to work without complaint. When the dinner rush finally ended and Martha counted out her wages for the day, Clara stared at the coins in her palm. Not much, barely enough for a room at the boarding house, if they'd take her, but it was hers, earned with her own labor. Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable rooming house on Elm Street, Martha said, reading her thoughts. Tell her you work for me. She might overlook your lack of a husband, no gentlemen visitors, though she's strict about that. Clara nodded, pocketing the coins. Thank you, Mrs. Martha, just Martha, and don't thank me yet. Tomorrow's Saturday, busiest day of the week. If you survive that, then we'll see about thanks. Clara was gathering her shawl when the kitchen door swung open. Martha's usual serving girl, Betty, Clara had learned, poked her head in. That Mr. Ray's back, she said, asking after the new girl. Clara's hands fumbled with the shawl's ties. Tell him she's gone home, Martha said firmly. He said to give her this. Betty held out a folded piece of paper. Said it wasn't forward, just neighborly. Martha took the paper, eyeing it suspiciously before handing it to Clara. Read it later. Go on home now. Clara walked to Mrs. Patterson's in the failing light, the paper burning in her pocket. She waited until she was alone in the small, clean room she'd rented her first space truly her own before unfolding it. The handwriting was careful, unpracticed. Asterisk, Miss, I realize I didn't catch your name. My foreman's wife is looking for help with the garden and chickens. Good wages, room and board included if wanted, if you're interested. I'll be at Martha's Friday morning. S. Ray asterisk. Clara read it twice, then set it on the small dresser. Room and board included. Away from town. Away from questions. Away from the fear that Thomas's men might come looking. But also isolated, dependent on a stranger's goodwill. She thought of his eyes, winter sky blue and seeing too much. Thought of Martha's warning, then thought of the coins in her pocket. How many months of scrimping it would take to save enough to truly disappear. Outside her window, Dry Hollow settled into evening. Somewhere out there, Silas Ray was riding back to his ranch, probably already forgetting the awkward new serving girl who'd nearly forgotten his coffee. And somewhere farther, Thomas was searching, or paying men to search. Clara pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. Tomorrow she'd face another day of hot water and aching feet. Friday, she'd have to make a choice. But tonight, in this small room paid for with her own wages, she was just Clara. Not Belle, not Morrison. Just Clara, starting over one dish at a time. Friday came too soon. Clara had survived the Saturday rush, her hands now bearing the calluses to prove it. She'd found a rhythm in the work, the steam, the soap, the endless plates. Martha had even trusted her to help with breakfast preparation, teaching her to flip eggs without breaking the yolks. When Silas Ray walked through the door at his usual time, Clara was ready, or thought she was. She poured his coffee steadily, set down the pot without forgetting, managed to meet his eyes when he thanked her. "I got your note," she said quietly, aware of Martha watching from the kitchen doorway. "And I'm grateful for the offer, Mr. Ray, but I have a position here." He nodded, unsurprised. "The offer stands if you change your mind. Sarah, that's my foreman's wife, she's getting on in years. Could use the help." Clara returned to the kitchen, trying to ignore the strange disappointment settling in her chest. She'd made the sensible choice. Town was safer than isolation. Martha's restaurant was respectable work. She didn't need complications. But that night, the walls of her small room felt closer than before. She lay on the narrow bed, listening to footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, the sounds of other lives pressing in around her. At Thomas's house, she'd had space but no freedom. Here, she had freedom but could barely breathe. She thought of the ranch 3 miles north. Open sky, work that meant something, growing food, tending animals, and winter sky eyes that saw her as a person, not a possession or a pair of hands. 3 days later, everything changed. Clara was carrying breakfast orders when she saw him through the window, a man in a black coat, asking questions at the bank. Her hands went cold. The plates rattled on the tray. She forced herself to keep moving, but her mind raced. Thomas didn't travel himself, but he had men who did, men who knew how to track someone who didn't want to be found. "Clara," Martha's voice, sharp with concern. "You're white as flour." Clara set the tray down carefully. "I need a moment." She slipped out the back door, pressing herself against the wall of the building. Think. The man might be anyone, a banker, a merchant, a traveler passing through. But the way he stood, the way he surveyed the street, Miss Clara nearly jumped out of her skin. Silas Ray stood at the mouth of the alley, leading his horse. "Are you all right?" She opened her mouth to say yes, to make some excuse, but what came out was, "Is your offer still good?" His eyes sharpened, taking in her trembling hands, the way she kept glancing toward the street. "It is." "When?" "Now, if you need." Clara looked at him, really looked. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, just stood there, solid and calm, offering escape. "I need to get my things." "I'll wait at the livery stable, side entrance." She slipped back into the restaurant. Avoiding the main dining room, Martha took one look at her face, and understanding dawned. "He found you." It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. Martha pulled off her apron, pressed a small cloth bag into Clara's hands. "Your wages through the week, plus a little extra. There's a back stair to the rooming house from the Taylor's garden. Go!" Clara gripped Martha's work-worn hands. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just stay safe." The journey to her room was the longest of Clara's life. Every corner could hide Thomas's man. Every footstep behind her made her heart race. But she reached Mrs. Patterson's without incident, packed her few belongings, and left rent money on the dresser. Silas was waiting as promised, with a second horse, a gentle mare that reminded Clara painfully of the one Thomas had sold. He helped her mount without comment, tied her bag to the saddle, and led the way out of town by back roads. They rode in silence for the first mile, Clara expecting at any moment to hear shouts behind them, but the road stayed empty, and gradually her breathing eased. "Thank you," she said finally. "No need." He glanced at her, assessing. "Can you ride faster?" In answer, she urged the mare into a canter. They covered the 3 miles quickly, turning off the main road onto a smaller track marked by a wooden sign, Triple S Ranch. The house appeared around a bend, not grand like Thomas's mansion, but solid and welcoming, built of local timber with a wide porch, windows that caught the afternoon light, smoke rising from the stone chimney. Beyond it spread outbuildings, fenced pastures, the ordered chaos of a working ranch. A woman emerged from the house, gray-haired and aproned. Sarah, Clara assumed. She took in Clara's arrival without surprise. "Room's ready," she called to Silas. "Figured you'd be bringing her today." Clara looked at him in surprise. "Saw a stranger in town asking questions," he said simply. "Put two and two together." They dismounted, and Sarah approached, her face kind but cautious. "You'll be wanting to rest first or see the work." "The work, please," Clara said. She needed something to do with her hands, something to stop her mind from spinning. Sarah led her around the house to a large garden, currently showing the first signs of spring growth. Beyond it stood a chicken coop, a small barn for milk cows, what looked like a root cellar. "Can't manage it all like I used to," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "John, that's my husband. He helps when he can, but the cattle take most of his time. You know anything about gardens?" "Some." Clara thought of the decorative roses at Thomas's house, the vegetables she'd helped her mother grow before marriage. "I can learn what I don't know." "Good enough." Sarah showed her the room, small but clean, in the back of the house near the kitchen. "You'll take meals with us. Washing's done Mondays." Questions. Clara had 1,000 questions, but only one that mattered. "Why are you trusting me?" Sarah studied her shrewdly. "Silas is a good judge of character. Also, I'm desperate for help, and you look desperate to give it. Seems fair." That night, Clara lay in another unfamiliar bed, but this one felt different. Through the window, she could see stars, countless stars unmarred by town lights. The house was quiet, but not empty. Somewhere, Sarah and John murmured to each other. From the barn came the occasional stamp of horses. She thought about the day, the terror of seeing Thomas's man, the desperate flight, the strange relief of arriving here. She'd traded one dependency for another, but this felt different. She wasn't Mrs. Thomas Bell here, wasn't the woman who'd worn silk and hosted dinners and slowly disappeared. She was just hired help, earning her keep with honest work. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Silas stood in the doorway, not entering. "Wanted to make sure you had everything you need." "Yes, thank you. She sat up, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "I should explain." "No need," he said again. "Your business is your own. But you should know what you've taken on. The man looking for me." "Is he your husband?" The direct question deserved a direct answer. "Yes." Silas absorbed this without judgment. "Are you running because he hurt you?" Clara thought about how to answer. The bruises had always faded quickly, and they'd been rare. Thomas preferred other methods of control. "Not in the way you mean. He never had to. He had other ways of making me small." Something shifted in Silas's expression. A man who makes his wife run 3 states away to escape him has hurt her plenty, regardless of whether he used his fists. They looked at each other across the small room. Clara felt exposed, seen in a way that should have frightened her but didn't. "Get some rest," he said finally. "Sarah starts early." After he left, Clara rose and went to the window. The moon was rising, painting the ranch in silver light. Somewhere out there, Thomas's man was probably wiring back that she'd been spotted, that the trail led north. They would come, maybe not tomorrow or next week, but eventually. She thought of Silas's calm acceptance, Sarah's practical kindness, the work waiting in the morning. When they came, she'd face it, but tonight, she was safe. Tonight, she could pretend this was home. The first night was not a mistake. She realized. The mistake had been all the nights before, the 3 years of nights in a house that was never home, beside a man who never saw her. She pressed her palm to the cool glass of the window. "That first night was a mistake," she whispered to the stars. Practice for a lie she might need, but here in the dark, alone with the vast sky, she could admit the truth. The only mistake had been waiting so long to run. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of earth and growing things. Clara's hands, already roughened from restaurant work, now bore the honest dirt of the garden. She rose with the chickens, worked through the warming days, fell into exhausted sleep each night. The simple routine should have soothed her, but anxiety crept in like morning frost. She'd been folding laundry when she saw them through the window, her carpet bag packed and waiting by her bedroom door, her few possessions ready for flight, always ready. Sarah noticed. Of course, Sarah noticed everything. "Planning on leaving us?" the older woman asked, not unkindly. Clara's hands stilled on the worn cotton. "I might need to, quickly." Sarah continued churning butter, the steady rhythm unchanged. "Seems to me a person who's always ready to run never really arrives anywhere." That evening, Clara couldn't settle. She'd weeded the garden twice, collected eggs 3 times, scrubbed the kitchen floor though it didn't need it. When supper ended and John retired to check the cattle, she found herself on the porch, her packed bag at her feet. The sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. She should go now, while there was still light. Head north to Wyoming, maybe, or west to California. Somewhere Thomas's reach couldn't follow. Beautiful evening. She didn't startle anymore when Silas appeared. He had a way of being present without intrusion, of filling space without demanding attention. He leaned against the porch rail, not looking at her bag. "I should go," Clara said. "I've brought you trouble." "Have you?" He seemed genuinely curious. "Far as I can tell, you've brought Sarah help she needed and given the chickens the best care they've had in years. You know what I mean. I know you're scared." He turned to face her then, those winter sky eyes steady. "Can't say you're wrong to be, but running when you're scared and running when there's danger, those are different things." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "How do you tell the difference?" "Danger usually announces itself. Fear whispers all the time." They stood in silence as the sky deepened to purple. Clara thought of 2 weeks of good work, of Sarah's wry humor, of meals shared at a table where no one criticized her posture or her opinions. "South Road's washing out," Silas said conversationally. "Spring floods, and the northern pass is still snowed in. If you're set on leaving, east is really your only option. Course, that leads right back through town." Clara looked at him sharply. He wasn't smiling, but something around his eyes suggested he might be. "Are you trying to keep me here?" "No, ma'am, just sharing information. Though if I were trying to keep you, I'd probably mention that Sarah's planning to teach you her apple pie recipe tomorrow. She doesn't share that with just anyone." Despite everything, Clara felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. "That's manipulation." "That's strategy." Now he did smile, just slightly. Big difference. Like fear and danger. "Exactly like that." Clara looked at her packed bag, then at the vast sky, then at the man beside her who made staying feel less like hiding and more like choosing. "I suppose one more day wouldn't hurt," she said. "I suppose not." She carried her bag back inside, unpacked it slowly. Through her window, she could see Silas walking toward the barn, his shadow long in the dying light. He'd be checking the horses, making sure all was secure for the night. The routine of it, the certainty, made something loosen in her chest. The next morning, Sarah did indeed teach her the apple pie recipe. They worked side by side in the warm kitchen, and Sarah told stories of her early days on the ranch, when everything was smaller and harder and full of possibility. "Silas built this place from nothing," Sarah said, crimping the pie crust with practiced fingers. "Him and his brother came out here with 2 horses and a deed to land everyone said was worthless. Brother died the second winter fever took him quick. Silas could have given up, sold out. Instead, he dug in deeper." Clara thought of the man who appeared without sound, who offered safety without questions. "He seems lonely." Sarah's hands paused. "Maybe, but there's lonely and there's alone. Not always the same thing." His fiancée. "Ah, you heard about that." Sarah resumed her work. "Sweet girl. Emma was delicate thing, really, not built for ranch life. But she tried. When the fever took her, Silas blamed himself. Said he should have sent her back east, where it was safer. That wasn't his fault. No, but guilt doesn't listen to logic much, does it? Clara thought of her own guilt for leaving, for not leaving sooner, for bringing her troubles to these good people's door. No, it doesn't. That afternoon, while the pies cooled, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. Her body tensed, ready to run, but it was only Silas and John returning from checking the far pastures. Silas swung down from his horse, and she saw him favoring his left shoulder. "Just strained it," he said when Sarah fussed. "Fence post fought back." Clara found herself stepping forward. "I could look at it. I used to. My mother was a healer, of sorts." Silas studied her, then nodded. In the kitchen, he sat without complaint while she examined his shoulder. The muscle was knotted, strained from overwork. She heated water, prepared a compress with herbs from Sarah's garden. "This might hurt," she warned. "I'll survive." She worked in silence, aware of his stillness, the controlled way he breathed through the discomfort. His shirt was worn soft from washing, and beneath it she could feel the solid strength of him, built from years of hard work rather than idle exercise. "There," she said finally, stepping back. "Keep it warm tonight. Should be better by morning." He rolled his shoulder experimentally. "Already is, thank you." Their eyes met and held for a moment too long. Clara looked away first, busying herself with putting away the supplies. "I'm thinking of staying," she said quietly, "if the offer's still good." "It is, even knowing what you know, especially knowing—" He stood, careful with his shoulder. "Clara, is that your real name?" "Clara, yes. The rest—" She shrugged. "Does it matter?" "Not to me. But if someone comes looking for Mrs. Thomas Bell—" Her hands stilled. "Then I suppose you never heard of her." "I suppose I didn't." That night, Clara unpacked her bag completely, hanging her spare dress in the small wardrobe, placing her mother's Bible on the bedside table. It wasn't much, but it made the room look lived in, like someone planning to stay. She was settling for sleep when she heard footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate, not Silas's near-silent tread or John's heavy boots. Her blood turned to ice. A knock at the door. Sarah's voice, sharp. "We're closed up for the night?" "My apologies, ma'am." A cultured voice, carefully polite. "I'm looking for someone. A woman, dark hair, about this tall, goes by Clara." Clara pressed her fist to her mouth, fighting the urge to grab her bag and flee out the window. "Lots of women fit that description," Sarah said coolly. "You'll need to be more specific." "She's my wife. Clara Bell, she's unwell." "Not thinking clearly. I'm terribly worried." Through the thin walls, Clara heard Silas's door open, his footsteps joining Sarah's at the front of the house. "Evening," he said mildly. "Something I can help you with?" "I was just explaining to your mother that I'm looking for my wife." "No wives here but Sarah," Silas said. "And I'm fairly certain John would object to you claiming her." The stranger, not Thomas, Clara realized. But one of his men gave a forced laugh. "Of course, but perhaps you've seen her. She may be using another name. She's confused. You see, needs her medication." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Silas said. His voice was still mild, but Clara heard steel beneath it. "Now, it's late. If there's nothing else." A pause. Then, "May I leave this with you? In case." The sound of paper. "There's a reward for information leading to her safe return." "I'll keep an eye out," Silas said. Footsteps retreating. The door closing. Clara stayed frozen until she heard the horse riding away, then crept to the main room. Silas and Sarah stood there. Sarah holding a photograph Clara recognized her wedding portrait. "Pretty dress," Sarah commented, then fed the photograph to the fire. Clara's knees nearly buckled. Silas caught her elbow, guided her to a chair. "He'll be back," she whispered. "Or others will come." "Maybe," Silas agreed. "Probably." "I should go. I'm putting you all in danger." "From what, a worried husband looking for his confused wife?" Sarah snorted. "Please. I've faced down claim jumpers and cattle thieves. One soft city man doesn't concern me." "But, Clara." Silas crouched beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "That man didn't come here with the law, didn't show a badge or court order, just money and a sad story. That tells me something." "What?" "That your husband wants you back quiet-like. No scandal, no official involvement." His eyes were steady on hers. "That gives us room to work with." "Us!" Clara's voice broke on the word. "You're ours now," Sarah said firmly. "We take care of our own." Clara looked between them, these people who barely knew her, who owed her nothing, who stood ready to face down her past without question. The tears came then, silent and unstoppable. Sarah made tea while Silas stoked the fire. They sat with her until the shaking stopped, until she could breathe again. No one asked her to explain. No one demanded her secrets. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need," Silas said, echoing his words from that first day. But there was need to acknowledge the gift they'd given her, not just shelter or work or safety, but belonging. For the first time in 3 years. Maybe the first time in her life. Clara felt like she was where she was supposed to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Thomas's man would ask questions in town, wave money around, spin his stories. But tonight, she was home. And she wasn't running anymore. The days after Thomas's man came to the ranch passed in a strange suspension. Clara worked harder than ever garden. Chickens. Helping Sarah with preserving early vegetables, but part of her remained constantly alert, waiting for the next knock at the door. A week passed, then 2. The man didn't return, though news filtered back from town that he was still there, staying at Murphy's, asking questions. Martha had sent word through Betty that he'd offered her $50 for information about the dark-haired woman who'd worked in her kitchen. $50, Sarah mused over supper. "Must want you back something fierce." Clara pushed food around her plate. "Thomas doesn't like losing things that belong to him." "People don't belong to people," John said firmly. It was more words than Clara had heard from him all week. "No," she agreed softly. "They don't." That evening, she found herself unable to settle. The walls felt close again, the weight of waiting unbearable. She slipped out to the porch, gulping the cool night air like water. "Can't sleep." She'd grown used to Silas's quiet appearances. He handed her a cup of coffee, settled beside her on the step. "I keep thinking I should tell you," she said. "The whole story. You deserve to know what you're protecting me from." "Only if you want to." She looked at his profile in the moonlight, the strong line of his jaw, the patient way he waited, never pushing, never demanding. "His name is Thomas Bell," she began. The words came slowly at first, then faster. The arranged marriage her father owed Thomas money, the gradual disappearance of everything that made her herself, the final straw of the horse. "Such a small thing," she said, "but it was the only thing left that was mine." Silas listened without interruption, without judgment. When she finished, they sat in silence for a long moment. "My brother loved to break horses," he said finally. "Called it gentling, but that wasn't what it was. He'd take a wild thing and make it obedient, useful, safe." He paused. "Always seemed a shame to me, taking something free and making it small." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I wasn't wild, just ordinary." "Nothing ordinary about you, Clara." The way he said her name like it meant something, like she meant something, made her chest tight. "I used to paint," she heard herself say. "Watercolors, mostly, flowers and birds and sometimes people. Thomas said it was a suitable hobby for a lady, until he saw I was actually good at it. Then the supplies started disappearing. No explanation, just gone. What else? I sang, not professionally, of course, but at church, at gatherings, I had a strong voice. Too strong, apparently, unladylike. So I learned to whisper. What else? Clara turned to look at him. His eyes were dark in the moonlight, intense with something she couldn't name. I rode, she whispered. Every morning. I'd take my mare out before anyone was awake. We'd run until I couldn't tell where she ended, and I began. It was the only time I felt... She trailed off. Free, Silas finished. Yes. There's a mare in the barn. Daisy, sweet-tempered but with fire underneath. She could use the exercise. Clara's breath caught. I couldn't... Dawn's best, before the heat sets in. He stood, draining his coffee. I usually ride the Eastern Trail. Check the fence line. Company would be welcome. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone with the vast night and a feeling in her chest like hope. She barely slept, rising while stars still crowned the sky. She dressed quietly, crept to the barn. Silas was already there, saddling his gelding. Daisy stood ready, and Clara's hands trembled as she ran them over the mare's neck. They rode out as the sky began to lighten. No words between them. The trail wound through scrub and stone, climbing gradually. Clara held Daisy to a walk at first, relearning the feel of a horse beneath her. But as the sky bloomed pink and gold, as the space opened up around them, she couldn't help herself. She let Daisy run. The mare responded eagerly, stretching into a gallop that ate up the ground. Clara leaned low, her unbound hair streaming behind her. The thunder of hooves, the rush of air, the feeling of power and freedom and joy, it burst through her like water through a dam. When she finally reined in, breathless and laughing, Silas was there. He'd kept pace easily, and now he watched her with something soft in his expression. I'd forgotten, she gasped. I'd forgotten it could feel like that. Don't forget again, he said simply. They rode back slowly, the sun warming their backs. Clara felt loose-limbed and alive in a way she hadn't in years. As they approached the barn, she saw Sarah in the garden, waving. We have a problem, Sarah called. Clara's joy evaporated. Thomas's man. No, well, yes, but not how you think. Sarah's face was grim. He's been spreading stories in town, saying you're touched in the head, that you might hurt yourself or others. Sheriff's getting pressure to form a search party. Clara's knees went weak. Silas steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Sheriff Daniels is a good man, he said. He won't act on gossip. But if Thomas comes himself, Clara said, if he brings papers, doctors, then we'll deal with it, Sarah said firmly. Right now, we need to think. They gathered in the kitchen. John had come in from the fields, his weathered face serious. Clara sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she couldn't taste. Could say you've moved on, John suggested. Headed further west. They'd track her, Silas said. Man like that has resources. Could hide her, Sarah said. We've got friends at other ranches. Same problem, just delayed. Clara listened to them plan around her, for her, and something inside her shifted. No, she said quietly. They all looked at her. No more running, no more hiding. She set down her cup. He wants to paint me as mad, then let him come explain why his mad wife ran 3 states away to escape him. Clara, Sarah began. I'm tired, Clara said, stronger now. Tired of being afraid, tired of looking over my shoulder. If he wants me back, let him come himself and say why. Silas studied her. You sure? No, she admitted, but I'm sure I can't live like this anymore. That afternoon, Clara did something she hadn't done in weeks. She rode into town. Silas insisted on accompanying her, though he stayed back, letting her lead. The main street seemed smaller than she remembered. narrower. She held her head high as people stared, whispers following in her wake. Let them look, let them wonder. She stopped at Martha's restaurant. The lunch crowd fell silent as she entered. Martha looked up from the register, and her face split into a smile. "Well," she said loudly, "look who's come to visit. How's ranch life treating you?" "Clara." "Very well, thank you," Clara said, matching her volume. "Sarah's teaching me to preserve vegetables. I thought you might like some pickled beets when they're ready." "I would indeed." Martha's eyes gleamed with understanding. "You must tell Sarah I'll trade her my recipe for winter squash soup." They chatted for a few minutes about recipes and gardens and the weather. Utterly normal. While the restaurant patrons listened avidly. When Clara left, she knew the story would be all over town by sunset. The mysterious woman from the Triple S had come to town. Calm as you please, discussing pickled beets. She made one more stop. Thomas's man was sitting on the boarding house porch, and she walked right up to him. He scrambled to his feet, eyes widening. "Mrs. Bell." "My name," she said clearly, "is Clara Morrison. I work at the Triple S Ranch. I'm of sound mind and body. And if Mr. Thomas Bell wishes to speak with me, he can come himself instead of sending others to spread lies about my mental state." The man gaped at her. "Furthermore," Clara continued, "if he continues to harass the good people of this town with his stories and his money, I'll be forced to share some stories of my own about why a woman would run so far from such a supposedly caring husband." "You can't, he won't?" "Yes," Clara said. "I can, and he will." She turned to go, then looked back. "Oh, and Mr. Harrison," he stammered. "Mr. Harrison, that photograph you've been showing around, I burned it. Just thought you should know." She walked back to where Silas waited with the horses, her spine straight, her hands steady. Only when they were out of town did she start to shake. Silas reached over, covered her hand with his. "That was brave." "That was terrifying," she corrected. "Most brave things are." That evening, as Clara helped Sarah with dinner, she felt something had changed, not just in how the town would see her, but in how she saw herself. She'd spoken her own name aloud, claimed her own story, refused to be small. "Proud of you," Sarah said quietly, peeling potatoes. Clara smiled, feeling it true for the first time in years. "I'm proud of me too." As they sat down to dinner, John raised his glass of water. "To Clara Morrison," he said simply. "May she never run again." They drank, and Clara felt the blessing of it settle into her bones. She was Clara Morrison. She worked the Triple S Ranch, and she was done being afraid. Word traveled fast in a small town. By the next morning, everyone in Dry Hollow knew that the woman at the Triple S Ranch had stood up to the stranger who'd been asking questions. Some admired her courage. Others whispered that no decent woman would leave her husband, regardless of the circumstances. Clara tried not to let the whispers bother her as she went about her work. The garden didn't care about her past. The chickens needed feeding whether she was respectable or not. But when she went to collect supplies in town that Thursday, she felt the weight of every stare. "Don't mind them," Betty said, helping her load flour sacks at the general store. "Half of them have secrets of their own they're hoping nobody notices." It was Martha who brought the real news. She arrived at the ranch that Saturday afternoon, driving her own wagon with grim determination. "He's coming," she said without preamble. "Thomas Bell himself. Harrison wired him after your little conversation. He'll be here Monday on the noon stage." Clara's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. She'd known this was coming, had forced it to happen, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach clench. "How do you know?" Sarah asked. "Harrison's been drowning his nerves in whiskey at the Silver Dollar, talking to anyone who'll listen about how his employer is displeased with his handling of the situation." Martha accepted a cup of coffee, settling her substantial frame at the kitchen table. "Also said Bell's bringing some sort of doctor with him. specialist in female hysteria. Apparently.
Of course he is,
Clara said bitterly.
If you can't control your wife, declare her mad. It's cleaner than scandal.
What do you need? Martha asked simply. Clara looked at this woman who'd given her a chance when she was desperate, who'd helped her escape when danger came calling. I don't know. I've never fought him before. I always just endured.
Well, you're not alone now,
Sarah said firmly. We need a plan. They spent the afternoon strategizing. John suggested bringing in the sheriff early, making sure he knew Clara's side before Thomas arrived. Martha would rally the women in town who'd been kind to Clara. Sarah would ensure the ranch hands were aware of potential trouble. What about legal help? Silas asked. He'd been quiet through most of the discussion, but Clara could see him thinking, planning. Thomas knows every lawyer from here to Chicago. Clara said, his money talks louder than truth. Maybe, maybe not. Silas stood. I'll be back. He returned 2 hours later with a small, neat man wearing spectacles and a serious expression. This is Eugene Cartwright. He's new to town, just opened his practice, used to work in Denver. Mr. Cartwright shook Clara's hand with surprising firmness. Ma'am, Silas has explained your situation. I'd like to help, if you'll let me.
I can't pay much.
We'll work something out. He pulled out a notebook. Now, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Clara talked until her throat was dry. The arranged marriage, the gradual erosion of her freedom, the escalating control, the final break. Cartwright took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Were there witnesses to any of his behavior? Servants, but they won't speak against him. Physical violence. Rarely. He was cleverer than that. Cartwright nodded. The good news is, you're not in Missouri anymore. Colorado territory has different laws, more sympathetic to women's rights. The bad news is, he can still cause trouble if he has the right connections. What do you suggest? Be visible, be calm. Let him be the one who looks unreasonable. Cartwright closed his notebook. And document everything. If he shows up and makes a scene, we want witnesses. Sunday passed in tense preparation. Clara went to church, sitting with Sarah and John, feeling the weight of curious stares. Pastor Holbrook's sermon was about courage in the face of trials, and his wife caught Clara's eye with a small nod of encouragement. That evening, Clara couldn't eat. She stood on the porch, watching the sunset, trying to imagine facing Thomas again. The thought made her hands shake. Scared, Silas joined her, as she'd known he would.
Terrified.
She wrapped her arms around herself.
You don't know what he's like. He never yells, never loses control. He just diminishes you, piece by piece,
until there's nothing left but what he allows. You're not nothing, Silas said firmly. You're not diminished. You're here. Aren't you, fighting back?
Only because you all...
She gestured helplessly. No. His voice was sharp. We gave you space to remember who you are, but the strength that was always yours. Clara looked at him, this man who'd offered her sanctuary without question, who'd seen her not as property to be returned or a problem to be solved, but as a person worth protecting. I have something for you, she said impulsively. She went inside, returning with a small watercolor she'd painted that week, the view from the eastern trail at sunrise. Mountains purple against a golden sky. I know it's not much, but... Silas took it carefully, studying it like it was precious. You painted this. You said I used to paint, so I tried again. She watched his face anxiously. Sarah had some old supplies in the attic. It's beautiful. He looked at her. You're talented. Thomas said accomplishments in a wife were like too much seasoning in a dish. A little adds flavor. Too much overwhelms the palate. Thomas, Silas said deliberately, is a fool. The word hung between them, stark and simple. Clara felt something loosen in her chest.
Yes,
she said wonderingly.
He is, isn't he?
Monday dawned clear and bright, mocking Clara's dark mood. She dressed carefully in her best dress, simple but clean, respectable but not trying too hard. Sarah braided her hair in a neat coronet that made her look older, more settled.
You don't have to face him,
Sarah said.
We could say you're ill, or no.
Clara checked her reflection one last time.
No more hiding.
They went to town together, Clara, Silas, Sarah, and John. Even some of the ranch hands tagged along, finding errands that needed doing. Martha had spread the word, and it seemed half of Dry Hollow had business on Main Street that morning. The stage arrived precisely at noon. Clara stood outside the general store, Silas beside her, watching as passengers disembarked. Then she saw him. Thomas looked exactly the same, immaculate despite the journey, every hair in place, wearing prosperity like armor. Behind him came a thin man with a medical bag. They conferred briefly. Then Thomas's eyes found her. For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. 3 years of conditioning screamed at her to shrink, to apologize, to become small. Then she felt Silas shift slightly closer, not touching but present, and she lifted her chin. Thomas approached with measured steps, the doctor trailing behind. He stopped a proper distance away, his expression showing mild concern mixed with disappointment.
Clara,
he said, as if she were a child who'd wandered off.
You've led us quite a chase.
Mr. Bell. She was proud of how steady her voice sounded. I wasn't aware I was being chased. I simply relocated for employment. His eyes flicked to Silas, dismissed him, returned to her. Employment, Clara. You're not well, doctor. Hartwell here specializes in female disorders. He can help you. I'm perfectly well, thank you.
Are you?
Thomas's voice remained gentle, reasonable. A well woman doesn't abandon her home, her husband, her duties. A well woman doesn't flee in the night like a thief. A well woman, Clara said clearly, doesn't stay where she's treated as property rather than a person. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Thomas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. You see, he said to the doctor, delusions. She's constructed this fantasy to justify her illness. He turned back to Clara. Come home, dear. We'll get you the help you need.
I am home, Clara said, and the only help I need is for you to respect my decision to leave.
Thomas sighed, the picture of patient suffering. Sheriff, he called, and Sheriff Daniels stepped forward reluctantly. I have documentation here from 3 physicians in Missouri confirming my wife's fragile mental state. I am prepared to take legal action if necessary. Cartwright appeared at Clara's elbow. And I have documentation of Mrs. Morrison's employment and good standing in this community. Colorado territory recognizes a woman's right to seek employment and residence separate from her husband under certain circumstances. Thomas's facade cracked slightly. Who are you? Eugene Cartwright, attorney at law, representing Miss Morrison's interests. Mrs. Bell, Thomas corrected sharply. That's a matter of some debate, Cartwright said mildly. The crowd pressed closer. Clara could see Betty from the restaurant, Mrs. Holbrook, even the widow Patterson who'd been trying to catch Silas's eye. Women who knew what it was to be diminished, to be told their voices didn't matter. Clara. Thomas tried again, his tone now tinged with warning. Consider your reputation. The scandal. Whose scandal? Martha's voice boomed from the crowd. Seems to me the only scandalous thing here is a man who can't accept his wife had good reason to leave.
You don't understand. Thomas said, she's not capable of making rational decisions. She needs protection, guidance.
I needed respect, Clara interrupted.
I needed to be seen as a person, not an accessory.
I needed my horse not to be sold without my knowledge, my paintings not to be hidden away, my voice not to be silenced because it was too strong for your taste. You're proving my point, Thomas said triumphantly. Listen to these ravings. Horses and paintings the fixations of an unbalanced mind, or the reasonable desires of a whole person, Pastor Holbrook said. Stepping forward, I've seen no evidence of imbalance in Miss Morrison. Quite the opposite. She attended church just yesterday, his wife added, participated appropriately in the service and social hour. She makes the best pickled beets in the county, someone called out, and nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Thomas's control finally snapped. Enough, Sheriff. I demand you enforce the law. This woman is my wife, confirmed by legal documentation. These people are harboring a runaway spouse. Sheriff Daniels looked uncomfortable. Well now, Mr. Bell, it's not quite that simple in the territory. Then I'll take her by force if necessary. Thomas snarled, reaching for Clara's arm. Silas moved. Not dramatically, not violently, just stepped smoothly between them. No, he said quietly. You won't. Thomas looked up at him. Silas had several inches on him, and his face flushed. And who are you to interfere between a man and his wife? Someone who knows the difference between a wife and property, Silas said. And someone who won't stand by while you harass a member of my household. Your household? Thomas's eyes narrowed. I see. So that's how it is. My wife has been... Careful, Cartwright warned. Slander is actionable in court. Thomas breathed hard through his nose, visibly struggling for control. The reasonable facade was crumbling, revealing the anger beneath. Clara, he said, his voice now cold as winter, you will return with me, now, or I will make your life, and the lives of everyone who's helped you, extremely difficult. Clara stepped around Silas, facing her husband directly. No, she said simply, I won't. You don't have a choice. Yes, she said, stronger now. I do. For the first time in 3 years, I have a choice, and I choose to stay here, where I'm valued for more than my ability to host dinner parties and keep quiet. You're making a mistake, Thomas warned. You'll regret this when you're old and alone, when no respectable man will have you. I'd rather be alone and free than married and disappearing, Clara said. And as for respectable men, she glanced at Silas, then back at Thomas. I've learned there are different kinds of respectability. The crowd murmured agreement. Thomas looked around, seeing faces ranged against him, his money and influence worthless against a community that had claimed Clara as their own. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, Clara said quietly. It is. For a long moment, they faced each other, the man who'd owned her for 3 years and the woman she'd chosen to become. Then Thomas turned on his heel and strode toward the boarding house, the doctor scurrying after him. The crowd began to disperse, people patting Clara's shoulder, murmuring support. She stood there, shaking now that it was over, hardly believing what had just happened. You did it, Sarah said, wrapping an arm around her. We did it, Clara corrected. She looked at the faces around her. Martha, the Holbrooks, Cartwright, Betty, even the widow Patterson, this town that had taken her in, given her space to remember who she was. And Silas, standing quiet and solid, watching her with something in his eyes that made her heart race for entirely different reasons than fear. Come on, he said gently. Let's go home. Home. The words settled into her bones like a blessing. She walked with them back to the wagon, knowing Thomas was watching from some window, knowing he'd try again in some other way. But for now, for today, she'd won simply by refusing to be small. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Clara felt wrung out, empty of words. But as they crested the hill and the ranch spread before them in the afternoon light, she felt something new blooming in the space fear had left behind. Not love, not yet, but possibility. And for now, that was enough. The week following Thomas's departure passed in a blur of ordinary tasks that felt extraordinary in their peacefulness. Clara threw herself into the ranch work with renewed energy, as if each planted seed and mended fence was a declaration of independence. But beneath the routine, she remained watchful, waiting for Thomas's next move. It came on a Friday morning, with the autumn frost just beginning to silver the grass. Clara was checking the henhouse when she heard horses approaching, not the familiar gait of ranch horses, but the measured tread of a formal party. Through the coop's small window, she saw Sheriff Daniels approaching with two men she didn't recognize. Sarah emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron.
"Sheriff, what brings you out this way?" "Official business, I'm afraid."
Daniels looked uncomfortable. "These men are from the territorial court. They have papers." One of the men, thin and officious, stepped forward. "We're looking for a Mrs. Clara Bell. We have a summons." Clara's hands tightened on the egg basket, but she made herself walk out calmly. "I'm Clara Morrison, also known as Clara Bell," the man pressed. "What's this about?" Silas appeared from the barn, John and several ranch hands behind him. The official cleared his throat importantly. "Mr. Thomas Bell has filed a petition with the territorial court. He's claiming abandonment and seeking an order for his wife's return, or alternatively, formal dissolution of the marriage with terms favorable to the aggrieved party."
"Meaning?"
Sarah asked sharply. "Meaning," Cartwright said, striding up the path from where he'd apparently been waiting by the road, "that Mr. Bell is trying to force Clara to either return or grant him a divorce that paints her as the villain." He held out his hand for the papers. "I'm representing Miss Morrison." The official handed over the documents reluctantly. Cartwright scanned them, his frown deepening. "He's claiming mental instability, abandonment without cause, and," he paused, glancing at Clara, "inappropriate conduct with another party." Heat flooded Clara's face. She knew without asking who that other party was meant to be.
"That's a lie,"
she said firmly. "Of course it is," Cartwright agreed. "But it's a strategic lie. If he can't force you back, he wants to ensure you're too scandalized to make a life here." "When's the hearing?" Silas asked. His voice was calm, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. 2 weeks, in Denver." Cartwright folded the papers. "We'll need to prepare a strong defense, character witnesses, evidence of Mr. Bell's controlling behavior, proof of Clara's stability and good standing in the community." After the officials left, they gathered in the kitchen. Clara sat at the table, staring at her hands while the others discussed strategy around her. The words washed over her legal procedures, witness lists, travel arrangements. All she could think about was standing in a courtroom, having her life dissected by strangers, Thomas twisting everything to make her look mad or immoral, or both. "I could just go back," she said quietly. The room fell silent. "Clara, no," Sarah said. "If I went back, he'd drop all this. No scandal, no court, no dragging all of you through the mud." She looked up at their faces. "You've done so much for me already. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking." Silas's voice cut through her words. "We're offering—" "There's a difference. But the ranch, your reputation, will survive just fine," John said gruffly. "Weather worse storms than this." "Clara," Cartwright leaned forward, "I won't lie to you. This will be difficult. Thomas has resources and connections. He'll try to paint you in the worst possible light, but you have something he doesn't."
"What's that?"
"The truth, and people willing to stand up and speak it." Over the next days, they prepared. Martha organized the women in town to write letters attesting to Clara's character. Pastor Holbrook agreed to testify about her church attendance and mental clarity. Betty would speak about her work ethic at the restaurant. Even the widow Patterson, perhaps feeling guilty about her previous coldness, offered to describe Clara's respectability. Clara found the outpouring of support overwhelming. She'd lived in Thomas's world for 3 years and couldn't name a single person who would have spoken for her. Here,
after just months. She had a community ready to fight beside her. The night before they were to leave for Denver, Clara couldn't sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out to the porch, needing air. The stars spread above her, vast and indifferent to human troubles. Nervous, Silas emerged from the shadows, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Terrified, she admitted, accepting the warm cup gratefully. What if he wins? What if the court believes him? Then we deal with that when it comes. He settled beside her on the step. But Clara, you've already won the important part. What's that? You got away? You remembered who you are. Court decision can't change that. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping coffee and watching the stars wheel overhead. Clara found herself studying his profile in the moonlight. This man who'd offered her sanctuary without question, who'd stood between her and Thomas without hesitation. Silas, she said softly, what Thomas is implying about us. I know. It could damage your reputation too. People might think. Let them think. He turned to her then, his eyes serious. Clara, I need you to understand something. I'm not protecting you because I expect anything. I'm not standing by you because I want whatever Thomas is suggesting. I'm doing it because it's right. I know, she said, and she did know. But part of her, a part growing stronger each day, wished it weren't quite so noble. That said, he continued, looking back at the stars, when this is over, when you're free of him, I'd like to court you properly, if you'd allow it. Clara's heart stuttered. Silas? I'm not asking for an answer now. Just wanted you to know my intentions are honorable. Whatever lies Thomas spreads. She thought about the morning rides, the quiet conversations, the way he saw her as a whole person. And if I said I'd welcome such attention when this is over, a smile touched his lips. Then I'd say Thomas Bell is an even bigger fool than I thought. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling too. You certainly know how to comfort a woman facing public humiliation. I try. He stood, offering her his hand. Come on, you need sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. She let him pull her to her feet, and for a moment they stood close, his hand warm around hers. Then he stepped back, proper distance restored. Good night, Clara. Good night, Silas. The morning came gray and drizzling, fitting weather for the journey ahead. Clara dressed carefully in her best dress, the blue one she'd made herself, modest but well-fitted. Sarah helped her with her hair, pinning it in a style that was severe enough for court, but still flattering. You look respectable as a judge's wife, Sarah declared. Thomas won't know what hit him. The train ride to Denver took most of the day. Their party was substantial, Clara. Silas, Cartwright, Martha, and Pastor Holbrook. Others had wanted to come, but Cartwright had advised keeping the group manageable. Clara tried to distract herself by watching the landscape roll by, but her mind kept circling back to what waited in Denver. Thomas would have hired the best lawyers. He'd have doctors ready to testify about female hysteria. He'd have twisted every moment of their marriage to support his narrative. Stop thinking so hard, Martha advised, sitting across from her. You'll give yourself a headache. I can't help it. I keep remembering things. All the times I should have stood up to him and didn't. And that's why you're here now, Martha said firmly, learning from the past, not living in it. They arrived in Denver as evening fell, the city lights glittering through the drizzle. Cartwright had arranged rooms at a respectable hotel. Clara had never stayed in a hotel as an independent woman, and the simple act of signing the register in her own name felt like a small victory. But as she lay in the unfamiliar bed that night, listening to the city sound so different from the ranch's quiet, she felt very small and very alone. Tomorrow she would stand before strangers and justify her existence, her choices, her sanity. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. It's Sarah, came the whispered voice. Clara opened the door to find not just Sarah, but Martha too, both in their nightgowns and robes. "Can't sleep either?" Martha asked. "Thought we might as well be wakeful together." They sat on Clara's bed like schoolgirls, and Martha produced a flask from her robe pocket. "Medicinal purposes," she said, pouring small measures into the water glasses. "I've never had whiskey before," Clara admitted. "First time for everything," Sarah said, "including standing up to tyrant husbands in court." They talked quietly through the night, sharing stories Clara had never heard. Martha's first husband, who died in a mining accident, leaving her to build the restaurant from nothing. Sarah's journey west as a new bride, terrified but determined. Women who'd faced hard things and survived. "You know what I think," Martha said as dawn began to lighten the windows. "I think Thomas Bell has no idea what he's up against. He's used to society wives who've been trained from birth to be quiet. He's never faced a woman who's remembered her own strength." "I don't feel strong," Clara confessed. "Strength isn't about feeling," Sarah said. "It's about doing what needs done, scared or not." A few hours later, Clara stood outside the courthouse, her small army arranged around her. She wore the blue dress like armor, her mother's Bible in her hands for comfort. Silas stood to her right, solid and reassuring. Cartwright reviewed his notes one last time. "Remember," he said, "answer honestly but briefly. Don't let them bait you into emotional responses. You're rational, stable, and had excellent reasons for leaving." Clara nodded, throat too tight for words. The courthouse doors loomed before them. Behind them, Thomas and his version of truth. But she wasn't the woman who'd fled in the night anymore. She was Clara Morrison, of the Triple S Ranch. She had work that mattered and people who valued her. "Ready?" Silas asked quietly. Clara thought of morning rides and honest work, of Sarah's wisdom and Martha's strength, of a community that had claimed her as their own, of the possibility of a future where she could paint and sing and ride without fear. "No," she said, "but I'm going anyway." And with that, she walked through the doors to face her past and fight for her future. The courtroom was smaller than Clara had imagined, but somehow that made it worse. There was nowhere to hide from Thomas's stare as she entered, nowhere to escape the weight of judgment in the eyes of strangers. She kept her gaze forward as Cartwright led her to their table, acutely aware of Thomas across the aisle with his team of lawyers, 3 men in expensive suits who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. Judge Harrison presided, an older man with sharp eyes and a carefully neutral expression. He called the proceedings to order with efficiency that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else on this drizzling Tuesday morning. Thomas's lead attorney, a Mr. Blackwood, stood first. He was exactly what Clara had expected, polished, articulate, and utterly convinced of his client's righteousness. "Your Honor," Blackwood began, "we're here today because of a tragedy. A good man has lost his wife to the influences of mental instability and, we believe, the manipulations of others who have taken advantage of her fragile state." Clara forced herself to remain still, though her hands clenched in her lap. "We will show," Blackwood continued, "that Mrs. Bell abandoned a comfortable home and loving husband without cause, fleeing in the night like a criminal, that she has shown signs of delusion and hysteria, that she has been living in circumstances that call into question both her judgment and her moral character." "Your Honor," Cartwright interjected, "I object to counsel's inflammatory characterization." "You'll have your turn, Mr. Cartwright." Judge Harrison said, "Continue, Mr. Blackwood." Thomas took the stand first. Clara hadn't seen him since that day on Main Street, and he looked exactly as he always had, perfectly groomed, radiating wounded respectability. He told his version of their marriage with practiced sorrow, a devoted husband trying to care for an increasingly troubled wife, her obsessions with painting and riding, her inappropriate attachment to a horse, her sudden flight without warning or explanation. "I blame myself," Thomas said, and Clara saw several people in the gallery nod sympathetically. I should have seen the signs sooner, gotten her help before she descended into these delusions of persecution. Tell us about these delusions, Blackwood prompted. She began to imagine I was controlling her, limiting her freedoms, when in reality, I was simply trying to protect her from her own impulses. She would fixate on things her watercolors. For instance, she would paint for hours, neglecting her household duties, becoming agitated if interrupted. And the horse, a gentle suggestion that we economize, became, in her mind, a malicious act. She accused me of stealing from her, when I had simply sold an animal we no longer needed. Thomas shook his head sadly. It was heartbreaking to watch her create these narratives of victimhood. Clara bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. This was Thomas at his best, taking kernels of truth and twisting them until she sounded unhinged. And now, Blackwood asked, what do you know of her current circumstances? I'm told she's living on a ranch outside Dry Hollow, working as a domestic servant. Thomas let disgust color his voice slightly. Living in proximity to unmarried men, doing manual labor. It's entirely inappropriate for a woman of her background and further evidence of her impaired judgment. Cartwright's cross-examination was sharp, but limited by what he could prove. Mr. Bell, when you sold your wife's horse, did you discuss it with her first? I didn't think it necessary. Household finances were my responsibility. Did she express attachment to the animal? She had an unhealthy fixation, yes. Is it possible that what you call unhealthy fixation was simply a woman's natural affection for a gift from her late father? Objection. Blackwood called speculation. Sustained. And so it went, Thomas deflecting every probe with calm reasonableness. By the time he stepped down, Clara could feel the weight of sympathy in the room tilting toward him. Dr. Hartwell came next, the thin specialist Thomas had brought to Dry Hollow. He spoke at length about female hysteria, the dangers of allowing women too much freedom, the way overstimulation could lead to mental breakdown. In my professional opinion, he concluded, Mrs. Bell requires structured care and firm guidance to recover from her current state. Have you examined Mrs. Bell? Cartwright asked on cross. She refused examination, which itself indicates, so you're diagnosing a woman you've never properly examined. Her behavior speaks for itself. Flight, delusion, inappropriate living arrangements. Thank you, Doctor. No further questions. The morning wore on with Thomas's witnesses. A banker who testified about Clara's erratic attempt to access funds. A neighbor who'd noticed her strange moods. Each testimony another brick in the wall Thomas was building around her. When the court recessed for lunch, Clara felt crushed by the weight of it. In the small room Cartwright had secured for them, she couldn't eat, couldn't think beyond the growing certainty that she'd lost before she'd begun. They're making me sound mad, she whispered. They're trying, Martha said firmly. Doesn't mean they're succeeding. The judge seems to believe them. The judge is listening, Cartwright corrected. Now it's our turn to make him hear something different. When court resumed, Cartwright called Pastor Holbrook first. The minister took the stand with quiet dignity, describing Clara's church attendance, her participation in community life, her obvious rationality. I've counseled many troubled souls. Your Honor, he said, Mrs. Morrison shows no signs of mental instability. What she shows is the courage of a woman who left an untenable situation to build a respectable life. Blackwood's cross-examination was aggressive. You've known the defendant for how long? Several months. And in those months, has she spoken of her husband? Rarely. Has she expressed what some might call paranoid thoughts about his intentions? Pastor Holbrook met his gaze steadily. She's expressed concern that a man who controlled every aspect of her life might try to force her return. Recent events suggest those concerns were entirely rational. Martha testified next, her presence filling the courtroom. She spoke of Clara's work ethic, her reliability, her kindness to customers. Hired her when she had nothing but the clothes on her back. Martha said, "Never seen someone work harder or more grateful for honest wages." "And her mental state," Cartwright prompted. "Sharp as a tack. Better with figures than half my suppliers. If she's mad, then I'd like a dozen more mad women in my kitchen." Sarah followed, describing life at the ranch, Clara's contributions, her normal behavior. "She's brought nothing but good to our household," Sarah stated. "Gardens producing better than they have in years, chickens laying regular, books balanced to the penny. That's not the work of an unbalanced mind." But it was Silas's testimony that shifted the room's atmosphere. He took the stand with his usual quiet presence, but Clara could see the steel beneath. Cartwright established his background, his reputation, his standing in the community. "Mr. Ray," Cartwright said, "you've been accused of inappropriate involvement with Mrs. Morrison. How do you respond?" "I respond that I offered a desperate woman honest work and safe shelter. Nothing more." His voice carried through the room. "If that's inappropriate, then I'll answer to God for it, not to a man who drove his wife to desperation." "Objection," Blackwood thundered. "Sustained. The witness will limit himself to facts." "Facts, then," Silas said. "Clara Morrison works dawn to dusk. She's taught my foreman's wife new gardening techniques that have improved our yield. She's shown kindness to every person on the ranch. She attends church, contributes to community gatherings, and has never shown a moment of the instability Mr. Bell describes." "You seem quite passionate in her defense," Blackwood noted on cross. "I'm passionate about truth," Silas replied. "And the truth is, the only thing wrong with Clara Morrison is that she was married to a man who couldn't see her worth." Finally, it was Clara's turn. She walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Across the room, Thomas watched with that expression she knew so well, disappointed patience, as if she were a child acting out. Cartwright's questions were gentle, leading her through her story. The gradual erosion of her freedom, the isolation, the moment she realized she was disappearing. "He never struck me," she said clearly. "He never had to. He had other ways of making me small. A word here, a restriction there, like water wearing away stone. So slowly you don't notice until you're drowning." "Tell us about the horse." Cartwright prompted. "My father gave her to me as a wedding gift. She was the last thing I had that was truly mine, that Thomas hadn't chosen or approved or modified to suit his preferences." Clara's voice strengthened. "When I found her gone, sold without a word to me, something broke, or maybe something finally mended. I realized I'd never be more than property to him, and property has no need of possessions of its own." "So you left." "So I left." She looked directly at Thomas for the first time. "I took nothing that wasn't mine before marriage. I asked for nothing. I simply wanted to exist as a person, not an accessory." Blackwood's cross-examination was brutal. "Mrs. Bell, you speak of restrictions. Weren't these simply the normal boundaries of marriage? Is it normal to forbid your wife from painting because her talent makes you uncomfortable? You were neglecting your duties." "I painted in the evenings. After all, duties were complete." "You claim your husband was controlling, yet he allowed you social engagements, fine clothing, a comfortable home. A cage is still a cage, Mr. Blackwood, no matter how pretty the bars." "So you admit you see marriage itself as imprisonment that suggests an unstable view of social institutions?" "I see my marriage as imprisonment," Clara corrected. "I've witnessed other marriages built on mutual respect and partnership. I wanted that. I tried for that. But Thomas wanted a decoration, not a wife. And so you fled to live with unmarried men." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice level. "I fled to where I could find honest work. That it was offered by good people who happened to include unmarried men is irrelevant to my purposes." "Is it?" Blackwood moved closer. You live in proximity to Mr. Ray. You ride with him in the mornings. You tend his home. I work for his foreman's wife. Clara interrupted. I ride because exercise and fresh air are beneficial to health, something Thomas never understood. And yes, Mr. Ray has shown me kindness. The fact that you and Thomas find kindness suspicious says more about you than about me. Judge Harrison called for order as murmurs rippled through the gallery. The rest of the examination blurred together questions about her mental state, her plans, her refusal to return. Clara answered as best she could, but exhaustion was setting in. When she finally stepped down, she felt hollow. Closing arguments brought no surprises. Blackwood painted her as delusional and Thomas as long-suffering. Cartwright argued for her right to self-determination and safety. Judge Harrison retired to consider. The waiting was agony. Clara sat between Silas and Sarah, drawing strength from their presence. Thomas never looked at her, conferring with his lawyers as if already planning his next move. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. This case, he began, presents questions about the nature of marriage, the rights of women, and the balance between protection and control. Clara's heart sank. Such philosophical openings rarely boded well. Mr. Bell has presented evidence of abandonment and claims of mental instability. Mrs. Bell has presented evidence of marital difficulties and personal autonomy. The judge studied his notes. The question before me is not whether Mrs. Bell was happy in her marriage clearly. She was not. The question is whether her unhappiness justifies abandonment and whether her current choices indicate mental impairment requiring intervention. Clara gripped Sarah's hand. I find, Judge Harrison continued, that while Mrs. Bell's departure was irregular, it does not rise to the level of abandonment when considered alongside the restrictions she faced. I further find no credible evidence of mental instability. Dissatisfaction with one's circumstances is not madness indeed. It often shows the opposite. Hope bloomed in Clara's chest. However, the judge said, and her heart fell, the marriage bond remains sacred. I cannot grant Mr. Bell's petition for forced return, as Colorado territory recognizes greater female autonomy than some states. But neither can I simply dissolve the union based on incompatibility. He looked directly at Clara. Mrs. Bell, you have 6 months to either reconcile with your husband or provide grounds for formal divorce beyond simple dissatisfaction. Mr. Bell, you are enjoined from harassment or forced contact during this period. The court will reconvene in 6 months to reassess. The gavel fell. Clara sat stunned. Not victory, not defeat, but something in between. 6 more months of limbo. 6 more months of being tied to Thomas. But also 6 months of freedom. 6 months to build her case, to prove she could stand alone. It's not over, Thomas said as he passed their table. 6 months, Clara. Then we'll see who's really mad. After he left, Cartwright tried to be encouraging. It's better than it could have been. We have time now. Time to build a stronger case for divorce. But Clara barely heard him. She was thinking of 6 more months at the ranch. 6 more months of morning rides and honest work. 6 more months to figure out who Clara Morrison really was. Come on, Silas said quietly. Let's go home. Home. Yes, she thought. Whatever happened in 6 months, she had that now. She had home. Winter arrived early that year, the first snow falling just 2 weeks after their return from Denver. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching the flakes drift down, transforming the ranch into something from a fairy tale. The court decision still weighed on her 6 months of limbo, but somehow the ranch made even uncertainty feel manageable. She'd thrown herself into preparations for the cold months with newfound purpose. The root cellar was stocked with preserved vegetables, the chicken coop reinforced against drafts, the garden bedded down under straw. Physical work had become her anchor. Each task completed a small victory against the voice in her head that sometimes still sounded like Thomas. You're up early, Sarah observed.
entering the kitchen to find Clara already kneading bread dough.
Couldn't sleep.
Clara worked the dough with practiced motions.
Thought I might as well be useful.
Sarah poured coffee for both of them. Still fretting about the hearing?
No, yes, maybe.
Clara paused in her kneading.
It's the waiting. 6 months felt like freedom in that courtroom, but now it feels like a sword hanging over your head.
Thomas always was patient. He'd wait months to mention some small transgression, then bring it up when I least expected it. Clara shaped the dough into loaves.
I keep wondering what he's planning.
Let him plan, Sarah said firmly.
You've got living to do.
Living. Such a simple word for something Clara was still learning. But she was trying. She'd started painting again, setting up a small workspace in the corner of her room. She sang while she worked. Softly at first, then with growing confidence. And the morning rides with Silas had become the highlight of her days. He never pressed, never presumed. But awareness hummed between them like a wire pulled taut, the way his eyes lingered when he thought she wasn't looking, the careful distance he maintained, honorable to a fault, the way her heart lifted when she heard his boots on the porch. The winter fair was Sarah's idea. Dry Hollow always has a fair the first Saturday of December. She announced one evening, contests, dancing, enough food to feed an army, good chance to show the town you're thriving. And to sell those preserves that are taking over the cellar, John added. Clara hesitated. Public events still made her nervous, the weight of judgment heavy on her shoulders. But Martha had asked her to help with the restaurant booth, and Betty was counting on her for the pie contest. I suppose it would be good to go, she said finally. Course it would, Sarah said. Besides, Silas usually wins the shooting contest. Might be nice to have someone cheering him on for a change. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm sure plenty of people cheer for him. Mm-hmm. Sarah's knowing smile made Clara busy herself with clearing dishes. The morning of the fair dawned clear and bright, the snow sparkling like diamonds under the winter sun. Clara dressed carefully in a green wool dress she'd made herself, trimmed with ribbon from the general store. It wasn't fancy, but it fit well and the color brought out the warmth in her eyes. You look pretty as a picture. Sarah declared that Thomas Bell won't know what he lost. Thomas isn't coming, Clara said, though she'd worried. No, but stories travel. Let them carry back news of Clara Morrison, thriving. The fairgrounds bustled with activity. Booths lined the main street, offering everything from knitted goods to fresh forged horseshoes. Children darted between adults' legs, faces sticky with candy. The air smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon, roasting meat and pine boughs. Clara lost herself in the work of helping Martha serve soup and sandwiches, grateful for busy hands and purpose. But she was aware of Silas throughout the day competing in contests, helping set up tables, always somehow nearby without crowding her. He's sweet on you, Betty said during a lull, following Clara's gaze to where Silas was teaching a young boy to whittle. We're friends, Clara said automatically. Sure you are, Betty grinned. The kind of friends who make moon eyes at each other when they think no one's looking. Before Clara could respond, a commotion arose near the shooting contest. She turned to see a familiar figure, not Thomas, but Harrison, his investigator. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching her with calculated interest. Clara's hands stilled on the ladle. After a moment's hesitation, she straightened her spine and walked directly toward him. Mr. Harrison, she said pleasantly. Enjoying the fair? He seemed surprised by her direct approach. Mrs. Bell. You're looking, well. Miss Morrison? She corrected. And yes, I am well. Amazing what honest work and good food will do for a person's constitution. Your husband is concerned. Mr. Bell's concerns are no longer my responsibility. She kept her voice light, aware of the curious glances from nearby townspeople. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have pies to judge." She walked away without waiting for a response, heart hammering but head high. Let him report back to Thomas. Let him describe her confidence, her place in the community, her obvious sanity. The pie contest was a revelation. Clara had entered on a whim, using Sarah's apple recipe with her own addition of cardamom. When the judge announced her second-place finish, the cheer from the Triple S contingent was loud enough to turn heads. "Should have been first," Silas said, appearing at her elbow. "That other pie was too sweet." "Flatterer," Clara said, but she was smiling. "How did the shooting go? See for yourself." He held up a blue ribbon. "Though I think your pie victory is more impressive. I just have to hit a target. You created something from nothing." "Hardly nothing. Sarah's recipe, her apples." "Your hands," he interrupted quietly. "Your choice to try." They stood there in the middle of the fair, surrounded by noise and movement. But Clara felt like they were alone in the world. His eyes held hers, warm and steady, promising things he was too honorable to say while she was still legally bound to another. "Silas," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. "Dance contest is starting," he said, voice carefully casual. "Care to partner with the shooting champion?" She shouldn't. Harrison was watching. The whole town was watching. But the fiddle was striking up a lively tune, and Silas was offering his hand. And she was so tired of shouldn't. "Yes," she said, and let him lead her into the circle of dancers. Clara hadn't danced in years. Thomas had considered it undignified, unless it was the staid waltzes of formal parties. But this was different. This was joy and movement, and Silas's strong hand at her waist, guiding her through the steps. She laughed when she stumbled, laughed harder when he lifted her clear off her feet in a spin. "You're drawing attention," he murmured during a slower passage. "Good," she said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Let them look. Let Harrison report back that the mad misses. Belle was dancing in the street like a happy woman." "You are a happy woman," Silas said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Clara realized. "I am." They didn't win the contest that went to a young couple who moved like they shared one body. But Clara felt victorious anyway, flushed and breathless and alive. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, the fair took on a magical quality. Clara helped clean up the restaurant booth, then found herself walking with Silas toward the wagon, their friends having mysteriously disappeared on other errands. "Thank you," she said, "for the dance, for everything." "No need to thank me." He helped her up to the wagon seat. "Though I should probably apologize. Harrison looked ready to swallow his tongue when I spun you." "Harrison can choke on his tongue for all I care," Clara said with feeling. Silas laughed, a rich sound that warmed her more than the blanket he tucked around her legs. "There's the spirit Thomas tried to kill." They rode in comfortable silence through the snowy evening. Clara felt something shifting inside her, some last wall crumbling. She'd spent so long being afraid of Thomas, of judgment, of her own desires. But what was the point? She had 6 months to prove herself capable of independence. Why waste them in fear? "Silas," she said as they neared the ranch, "when this is over, when I'm free, what then?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'll court you proper. Sunday dinners and flower bouquets and all the things you should have had the first time." He glanced at her. "If you'll have me." "And if I said I don't need all that, if I said I already know what I want?" His hands tightened on the reins. "Then I'd say you're worth waiting for. 6 months, 6 years doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Clara said softly. They pulled up to the barn. Silas came around to help her down, and she let herself lean into him for just a moment, feeling the solid warmth of him, the safety he represented. "Clara," he said, voice rough, "you know I want, but you're still—" "I know," she said. "I know what's proper and right, but Silas, I've been proper my whole life. It didn't save me from Thomas. It didn't make me happy. Just let me have this moment.
Let me stand here with you and want something for myself." He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You can have anything you want," he said. "Anything I can give, it's yours." For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. The world seemed to pause, waiting. Then lantern lights spilled from the house as Sarah opened the door, and the moment broke. But not painfully. Silas smiled, stepped back to a proper distance, and offered his arm. "Let's get you inside before Sarah comes looking with her shotgun." Clara laughed, taking his arm. "She likes you too much to shoot you." "Maybe, but she likes you more." Inside, the kitchen was warm and bright. Sarah had hot cider waiting, and John was already regaling her with tales from the fair. Clara sat at the table, in her home, and felt pieces of herself clicking into place. 6 months. She could survive 6 months, and at the end of them, she'd either be divorced or she'd find another way to freedom. But she wouldn't go back. Not to Thomas, not to that life, not to being small. "Good day," Sarah asked, noting her smile. "Yes," Clara said, thinking of dancing in the street, of blue ribbons and apple pie, of Silas's hands gentle on her face, of Harrison watching her happiness and having no power to diminish it. A very good day. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in fresh white. A new season. Clara thought, a new chance, and this time she would make the most of it. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it burst across the ranch like a celebration. Clara stood in her garden, now expanded to twice its original size, watching the first green shoots push through the dark earth. 6 months had seemed an eternity in December. Now, with her court date just a week away, it felt like barely a heartbeat. She'd changed in those months. Her hands were strong from work, her skin golden from the sun, her voice clear when she spoke. The woman who'd crept into Dry Hollow's barn that rainy night was a ghost. In her place stood Clara Morrison, who could birth a calf at midnight, calculate feed costs in her head, and make the best apple pie in 3 counties. "Letter came," Sarah called from the porch, waving an envelope. Clara's stomach tightened. Letters these days usually meant legal documents, but when she saw Cartwright's handwriting, she relaxed. "Good news," she read aloud to Sarah. "Thomas has agreed to divorce terms. He's withdrawing his claims of mental instability and abandonment. In exchange, I make no financial claims on his estate and agree to discreet proceedings." Sarah snorted, "Meaning he wants to save face." "Let him." Clara folded the letter carefully. "I want nothing from him except my freedom." "And you're sure a woman should have something put by?" "I have something put by," Clara interrupted. "I have my wages saved. I have skills. I have a community. That's worth more than any money Thomas could give me." Sarah studied her, then smiled. "You've grown strong, girl." "I was always strong. I just forgot for a while." That evening, Clara walked to the eastern pasture where Silas was mending fence. He worked in shirt sleeves despite the cool air, and she allowed herself a moment to admire the easy strength in his movements before making her presence known. "Cartwright sent news," she said. He straightened immediately, eyes searching her face. She told him about the letter, about Thomas's capitulation, about the quiet divorce that would finally set her free. "So it's over," he said. "Nearly. We still have to appear before the judge. Make it official, but yes, it's over." They stood there in the fading light, a whole conversation passing without words. 6 months of careful distance, of proper behavior, of stolen glances and moments that meant everything and nothing. "Clara," he began. "There's something else," she said quickly, before courage failed her. "Something I need to say. These past months, you've been careful with me, respectful, waiting until I was free." "You weren't free," he said simply. "Wouldn't have been right." "I know, and I love you for it. The words hung between them, unexpected and true. Clara felt her cheeks heat but didn't look away. I love you for your patience and your honor. But Silas, I'm nearly free now, and I want you to know I choose you. Not because you saved me, not because I need shelter or protection. I choose you because you see me whole, because you make me laugh, because these 6 months of Sunday dinners and morning rides have shown me what partnership really looks like. Silas set down his tools with careful deliberation, crossed the space between them in 2 strides, and cupped her face in his hands. Say that again, he requested, voice rough. I choose you, Clara repeated, clearer now. I love you. Clara Morrison, he said. I've loved you since you forgot to set down that coffee pot. Loved you more when you stood up to your husband in the street. Loved you every morning when you rode beside me like you were born to it. When you're free truly, legally free, I want to marry you. Not to save you, not to protect you, but because I can't imagine my life without your voice in this house and your hand in mine. Yes, Clara said, not waiting for the question. Yes, to all of it. He kissed her then, there in the pasture with the mountains as witness, not the desperate kiss of people stealing moments, but the steady promise of a lifetime to come. When they finally parted, Clara was laughing and crying at once. Sarah's watching from the kitchen window, she said. Let her watch. But Silas stepped back to a respectable distance, though his hand found hers. 1 week, then we do this proper. The week passed in a blur of preparations. Clara packed her few belongings from Thomas's house, her mother's Bible, her father's watch, a pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's. Everything else she left without regret. Those things belonged to a different woman, one who disappeared piece by piece until only an echo remained. The morning of the hearing, Clara dressed in the blue dress she'd worn to the winter fair. Sarah fixed her hair, and Martha arrived with a new hat. For luck, she said gruffly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. The courthouse in Denver looked less imposing this time. Clara walked in with her head high, surrounded by her chosen family. Thomas sat across the aisle, looking older somehow, diminished. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Judge Harrison called them forward. The proceedings were swift. Thomas's lawyer read the agreement. Cartwright confirmed Clara's acceptance. Both parties signed where directed. Mrs. Bell, the judge said, you understand you're relinquishing all claim to the Bell estate. I understand, Your Honor, and it's Miss Morrison, if you please. A ghost of a smile crossed the judge's face. Miss Morrison, then, and you're satisfied with these terms? Entirely satisfied. Mr. Bell, anything to add? Thomas stood slowly. For a moment, Clara thought he might object, might try one last manipulation. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something like recognition in his eyes. Not understanding, perhaps, but acknowledgement that the woman he'd tried to contain had flown beyond his reach. Nothing to add, Your Honor, he said quietly. Then, by the power vested in me by Colorado territory, I declare this marriage dissolved. The gavel fell with finality. You're free to go, Miss Morrison. Free! Clara stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply of the spring air. Free. The words sang through her blood like wine. She was aware of Silas beside her, of Sarah's arm through hers, of Martha's solid presence. But for a moment she simply stood and felt the weight of chains she hadn't fully acknowledged until they were gone. Now what? Sarah asked gently. Clara turned to Silas, who was watching her with eyes full of patient love. Now, she said, I'd like to go home, and tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to start planning a wedding. A small one, just family. Family? Martha repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. They made an odd procession back to the train station, a rancher, a restaurant owner, a minister and his wife, a foreman and his wife, and a woman glowing with newfound freedom. Thomas had already gone, vanished back to his world of crystal and propriety and wives who knew their place. On the train home, Clara watched the landscape roll past and marveled at how different it looked now, the same mountains and plains, but seen through eyes that belonged solely to her. "Regrets?" Silas asked quietly. "No," Clara said, meaning it. "That life was killing me slowly. You all gave me the chance to live." 3 weeks later, on a perfect May morning, Clara stood in the church where she'd first hidden in the barn. She wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, with Sarah's lace collar and Martha's pearl earrings. The church was full word of the wedding had spread, and it seemed all of Dry Hollow wanted to witness the woman who'd fought for her freedom pledge herself by choice. Pastor Holbrook spoke of partnership and purpose, of two people choosing to build something together. When he asked if anyone objected, the silence was profound. Then Betty called out, "About time," and the church dissolved in laughter. Silas took her hands, work rough and gentle, and spoke his vows in the steady voice she'd come to love. Clara's own promises came clear and strong to love, to honor, to stand beside this man who'd given her space to remember herself. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Holbrook declared. "Mr. Ray, you may kiss your bride." "Mrs. Ray," Silas murmured, just for her. "Clara Ray, how does that sound?" "Like home," she whispered, and rose on her toes to meet his kiss. The celebration spilled onto Main Street. Martha had closed the restaurant to cook the wedding feast. The general store owner brought out his fiddle. Children darted between dancing couples, and Clara danced with her husband in the street where she'd once confronted her past, her laughter ringing clear as church bells. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara stood on the ranch porch in Silas's arms. Their guests had gone home, full of cake and good wishes. Sarah and John had tactfully retired. The evening was theirs. "No regrets?" Silas asked again, echoing his question from the train. Clara turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. "Only one," she said, "that it took me so long to find you." "You found yourself first," he reminded her. "That's what matters." She thought of that scared woman in a rain-soaked barn, running from a life that was slowly killing her. Thought of all the small victories that had brought her here, learning to work, to speak, to choose. Learning that love wasn't about becoming smaller, but about growing together toward the sun. "I love you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for seeing me." "Always," he promised, and carried his bride across the threshold of their home. Inside, the kitchen was warm with lamplight. Her easel stood in the corner where the morning sun would find it. Her mother's Bible rested on the shelf beside Silas's ledgers. Through the window, she could see Daisy in the pasture, the stars beginning to emerge, the vast sky stretching toward tomorrow. Clara Ray, she thought, testing the name like a new dress. It fit perfectly. She was home. "Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying." She said her first night was a mistake. Then the cowboy kissed her like he knew everything and... Please share in the comments below where you're listening from so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and Silas's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic frontier tales. Give this video a like if it touched your heart, and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover this story of courage, freedom, and finding love on your own terms. Your support means the world and helps keep these tales of the Old West alive.